Hello, my name is Artem Klyushnikov, and I'm a director of Analytical Center for Leadership Research and Development in Kiev, Ukraine. And it is my privilege today to address you at Davenport University Day of Research. And when I was initially invited to speak to you, I was given a freedom to choose a topic. So I thought that I would speak about a topic that is close to my heart, and that is the topic of cross-cultural research. And the reason why this topic is very close to my heart is because I am a Ukrainian who studied in the United States and then went back to Ukraine and tries to teach leadership here and study leadership here. And I can tell you that I can't really take an instrument developed in the United States, bring it here and blindly just use it without critical evaluation, critical assessment of what this instrument measures, of all the constructs, focal constructs that it uses. Simply because when I come to Ukraine and I start talking about leadership, and I use the word leader, I basically transliterate the word leader, nobody understands me. Nobody understands what I'm talking about. Because the word leader doesn't necessarily apply to business settings. So, I believe it is very important to understand these dynamics as you embark on cross-cultural research. Language constitutes reality, and whenever you use a specific term, you need to understand it from the standpoint of that culture. I mean, just to use an analogy from the physical world, when you talk about 20 degrees Fahrenheit, it'll be totally different from 20 degrees Celsius, even though both are temperature. Or if you talk about 1 mile and 1 kilometer, you'll be off by quite a lot if you do not understand the difference between the two terms, even though they signify the distance. And I believe that in social reality, these differences are much more subtle and yet much more significant. So that's why being very thorough in doing preparation for the cross-cultural research or doing research in another culture is very important. Because if you do not do your due diligence, you will come up with the results which will be totally misleading. They will not be representative of the culture that you have studied. You see, we see the real world only in the categories of our own language. And when you study a specific area, and again, my area is leadership, so I'm going to use the example of leader. And then you go to another culture and you use the same construct, and you believe that everybody around you really understands what you're talking about. Well, they do understand the word, but they bring completely different meaning. They put totally different meaning into it. So using, say, a Shakespearean quote, which is quite a rephrasing it, I want to say, would a leader by any other name be the same? And I would like to pause it here and to say that it won't. Whenever you use leader in the United States, you have one image. When I use leader here in Ukraine, I have totally different image. When we talk about leadership in Japan, it'll be a third understanding. Or China, or India. All of these different countries will use the same term, or you may use the same term in all of these different countries. And yet, you will have totally different person, totally different image that this construct represents. So of course, when you take an instrument, whatever it is, let's say I want to study leadership in Ukraine, and I take a specific leadership assessment instrument. I really need to take it through translation, back translation, validation process. So in terms of translation, I invite a local interpreter who looks at the original and translates it into the local language. Then I take another interpreter who did not see the original instrument, but who translates the translation of the instrument back into the original. So I am, as a researcher, later can compare the original and the translation of the instrument in the local language. And again, I mean, it's a silly example, but if you ever want to have some fun, try to put a piece of poetry that you like in Google Translate. Translate it in any other language, and then that translation bring back into English. And I will tell you that you will get totally different text, and sometimes it's quite funny. And of course, back translation is not done by machine, but done by human beings, so it's much more intelligent. And yet you really have to make sure that the terms that are used, the constructs, the focal constructs that are used in your instrument are conceptually equivalent and functionally equivalent. So conceptual equivalence implies similar attitudes and behaviors. So if you say, I'm talking about a leader, you imply certain attitudes and certain behaviors. And maybe in the United States, it's a person who is a leader among equals. There is no power distance. Maybe there is certain servanthood involved. Maybe there is certain investment into the employees that is involved. And there is a certain worldview about your employees, that they're basically good and they want to work and we don't have to micromanage them. And yet when you use the concept of a leader here in Ukraine, first of all, as I said, we don't really have the word leader, transliterated word leader, in business. I mean, we do have the word leader transliterated from English, but it usually signifies or is used in athletic context, in political context, and in the context of groups of deviant behavior, a leader of a gang, okay? So that's about it. That's the realm of usage of this word. So let me take you through certain examples of the word leader being used in a few different languages. So you could understand the traps that you may encounter when you embark on cross-cultural research. Oh, and before I forget, so I told you about conceptual equivalence, so it's about similar attitudes and behaviors. Now there's also functional equivalence. So it's relationship with the focal variable with its antecedents and consequences. So basically, is it placed in the same context? So what brings about leadership and what results after good leadership? Okay, so that's also very important to understand. So going back to my idea of giving you examples, let's use the word leader. We don't have the word for leader in Ukraine in business settings, transliteration. But we have the word керівник. What does it imply? Well, it has the same root as the verb, which means to drive a car. So you're in control. You're deciding where to go. You're making your own decisions. You do not invite anybody else into the decision-making process. And of course, I'm just talking about the similarities of the words, but there is much more. If I use the word керівник, it implies that this is a person who takes full responsibility for everything, that employees expect the leader, the керівник, to take the responsibility for their actions and to be more or less paternalistic. In Russia, there is a word for leadership also. They do not use the word leader in business settings. And they have another word for leadership, which is руководитель, a leader in business settings. Руководитель. I mean, literally, it's a compound word which means the one who leads by the hand. And of course, nobody thinks about the etymology of the word anymore, but it has its history and it has its place in the culture. So there is a lot of paternalism and there is a degree of authoritarianism as a result when you use this word. So whenever you use the instrument and if you translate it, just transliterate it into leader, well, many people may not be able to understand what you mean because they have never used this word in business settings. But if you start using other equivalent words that are actually used in business settings, they will bring a lot of connotation with them, a lot of meaning with them that is totally foreign to your understanding of the construct of leadership. Or let's take Spain, not Latin America, because I don't really know much about Latin America, but since I live in Europe, kind of have to deal with European languages and European mentality, if you will. So most commonly word that is used for leader in Spain is jefe. And jefe connotes power distance, connotes this, strong guy who is this, guru and who just leads people with a strong hand. Okay, so initially the concept of jefe came from the, being military chief. Okay, so in a way Spain is rather hierarchical. Okay, and another example that I wanted to use, I have had an opportunity to teach leadership in Kenya on a number of occasions, and I also, because I love culture, I try to understand how they understand the concept of leadership. So there are like 42 people groups who live there, and they have 42 languages, which I do not know, but they have two official languages, English and Swahili. Now, English is pretty common to all of us here right now, but let's focus on Swahili. So they have a number of words, number of titles for a leader. Again, you can't truly, if you speak in Swahili, you do not have the word for leader in terms of transliterated word for leader. However, you have the word kiongozi, and the root word is ongoza, which means the head. Again, it signifies the hierarchical relationship, okay? Or simamizi, and this word implies a person who takes full responsibility. So in a way, it's also certain paternalism as well. Or kurugenzi, and it comes from the word mkuu, which it means high up. So again, the hierarchy is very well established. Or mkubwa, it's actually a slang for a leader in Swahili, meaning boss, mkubwa, but literally it means big. So it's this big macho guy, okay? So again, here you are, a student of leadership who really wants to study and understand leadership in a different culture. And you take, MLQ or any other instrument that exists out there in terms of studying different leadership theories or authentic leadership questionnaire, etc., and you go to a different culture. And as I told you, you really have to go through translation, back translation, and validation process. And validation includes, going into focus groups, discussing the instrument, talking to the local people, how they understand the questions, what do they feel about them, how would they respond, how do they understand what the questions imply, etc., etc., etc. So again, studying something in a different culture is a very rewarding process, because you open yourself up to realities that you wouldn't have known otherwise. You open yourself up to the understandings that you wouldn't have known also otherwise. So as you go into this endeavor, I would like you to note down just a few points. Do not assume. Do not assume that what you understand about the construct will be understood the same way by people in a local culture. Do thorough work of translation, back translation, with local researcher assistance. So you always need to involve local people, not only at the level of translation, back translation, but also at the level of meaning, where you have to have somebody as an aid to you, explaining to you how people understand this construct or this translation or that translation, and then conduct focus groups, talk to other local people, and really make sure that the instrument you ended up with measures the same thing that original instrument measures. Conduct validity testing, and I have already alluded to that. And again, I'm a strong proponent of qualitative inquiry when it comes to leadership research in other cultures, because I believe you first need to understand the phenomenon through the eyes of the local people, and only then you can go into quantitative research. So if time permits, if money permits, go into mixed methods. Start with qualitative, then continue with quantitative. And then you will really contribute to the body of knowledge in the social arena, whatever that arena may be for you. Thank you very much. I think that'll be it for today. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you today, and I look forward to other instances when I may be of use to you. Goodbye.